Welcome. In this documentary, I'll be interviewing and having a discussion with Sheila Leicht, a court reporter for the Gwinnett County Judicial System. She has been working in this career for over 20 years and is still practicing to this day. So thank you for taking the time to let me interview you. I would just like to ask, how did you get started in this career? Like, what led you on this path?
This is my 20th year doing this, and I knew that I wanted to do something in the legal field. I knew I really did not have time to go to law school. I had two very young children, and I considered paralegal school different options, and I had a friend who was a court reporter, so I spoke to her about it and thought it would be, a pretty interesting career. I could type really fast, and I'm a good listener, so it seemed to work out pretty well for me. So I did some training, and I have an English degree, so that sort of went hand in hand with what I do. And I started working in court, and I've been there for the last 20 years.
So it just kind of naturally fell into place. It wasn't like you went to school thinking, I want to be a court reporter one day.
No, not at all. Didn't even know that was something to do. I'd never been to court before, so I didn't really know all the ins and outs of the people that worked in the court system.
Yeah, well, it's a very impressive job. There's obviously some people that'll talk really fast or kind of mumble and things like that. So in those situations, do you just kind of like guesstimate on what is being said, or?
Oh no, and I'm sorry for interrupting you, because that's what I hate in my job, but it is our job to make an accurate record. We have to make a verbatim record. Everything that's said in the courtroom has to be taken down accurately to stand up for appeals. So if people are talking over each other, we have to interrupt, stop them. If they aren't giving verbal answers, we have to stop them. If we don't understand something because they mumbled, we have to stop them, which can get a little tedious. People don't like that always, but it is an expectation of what we're supposed to do, and sometimes the judges will do the interrupting for us, and other times it's up to us. So just very important to get an accurate record, and one of the reasons why it's so important to have a live person in the courtroom taking the proceedings down versus digital recording.
That can be a really big deal with your job, especially if it's a case that's not being, filmed for television or anything like that. It's a lot of responsibility to make sure you write everything down accurately.
Right. And actually, even if it were to be filmed or any TV coverage, our record is the official record for the appeal process to be filed into the clerk's office, to be there forever.
Yeah, so that really puts a lot of power and responsibility in your hands, because if you wrote something wrong, that could have an impact on someone else's appeal or things like that.
Absolutely. So. That's why we are taking it down ourselves, and then we always run a backup recording. And a lot of people have made comments over the years about, well, why don't you just record it? Well, sometimes the recording isn't very clear, isn't very accurate as far as what you interpret of what you hear. So we're also taking notes as we go along with our recording and the room recording that we have. So we have multiple layers of a takedown to preserve the record.
I'm sure that's a pretty common question you might get is, in this day and age, why do you still have to write everything down versus just record it with audio?
Right. And one of the responses is when you watch something on TV, you can hear something one way and someone else hears it a completely different way. Background noises, things like that. It can change your perception of what you heard. So again, like I said, it's just important to have a human there versus just a recording device, where there can be lots of problems. We actually have to maintain our records for 30 years on felony convictions and pleas. So it's just a very important process of the criminal justice system.
It seems like your job might be stressful at times. Would you say so?
Yes, it is. It can be very stressful when you have lawyers who are very adversarial, arguing among themselves, arguing with the judge, arguing with witnesses. It can create a stressful situation in the courtroom, and we still have to make sure we get every word down, regardless of what the temperature of the courtroom is, so to speak. And then there's a perception of and an expectation of getting these transcripts out in a timely manner. So we have 120 days to get all our transcripts filed in. So you got to have a very intense 2-week trial, and you've got to get that all typed up, get it corrected, filed into the clerk's office for the appeal within 120 days. And that goes for whether it's a very easy trial or a very intense trial.
And some trials, like you just mentioned, are just like a couple weeks long, and those might have their overwhelming moments or whatnot, but I'm sure you've been in some trials that were almost excessively long before.
I have. A few years ago I was in a case that involved Ford Motor Company where someone had been killed in an accident, and it was a product liability case. We tried the case for 3 weeks, and there was a mistrial at the end of the 3rd week. And it was just a very, very intense 3 weeks, and then for it to end the way it did was very much a letdown for everyone. Then it was just retried recently. I did not participate in the entire trial. I was only there for 1 day. But it ended up with one of the largest plaintiff's verdicts in Georgia history.
Wow.
So, it's good to be a part of something like that, but it is a lot of stress.
And, obviously there's stress from it, taking an excessively long amount of time and maybe getting repetitive at times, just hearing the same thing over and over again. But I'm sure there's another aspect of stress when you might be sitting in the presence of somebody that's done genuinely terrible things, and you're around them for days.
Yes, it can be. I actually had someone on the witness stand that was just a witness for a case, was not actually the defendant, and I found out at the end of the hearing that he was actually in jail for killing someone. And I didn't know that, and it really kind of set me back a little bit, because generally I know what someone's been charged with, and I thought maybe he was in custody for, a DUI or, maybe an aggravated assault even, but not murder. And I was involved in a trial where a young man had broken into 6 different residences in a local city and had actually killed someone, but had shot at a few other victims in the process. And he did not look like someone you would be afraid of if you saw him on the street at all. You just don't ever know what's going on in someone's head, and that this person had actually murdered someone, and he was found guilty of murdering this individual.
Some of those cases must be kind of shocking to you when you see the perpetrator. The first person people think about a lot is like Jeffrey Dahmer.
Oh, yes.
Because they think, he doesn't look, crazy or anything. Obviously, some people just have a look to them that's very off-putting.
Right,
so
right.
I'm sure you've been surprised before with some cases.
I have been, and I've gone into some cases where I knew what the charges were, but I didn't know any of the details of the charges, and was quite surprised when the testimony came out and we found out what all the details of what actually happened in some of these cases were.
The details can definitely be a game changer.
Yes, and the surprise that can happen with people on the jury that things are going along and it's okay, I don't know if this person is really guilty, and then all of a sudden that big aha moment happens and they find out, wow, I can't believe, that this is coming out at this point. But it's not always that interesting. There are a lot of cases that are just the same old, boring, a lot of drug cases. I used to do a lot of DUI cases, and they were very, very similar. And watching people doing field sobriety tests on the side of the interstate or on the side of the road, that type of thing. But felonies are a lot more interesting.
Yeah, there's a wider variety there with felonies.
Yes.
That's for sure. Obviously, if anyone were to go on the internet and look up on YouTube or something, you might see, crazy courtroom outbursts and things like that, where things kind of get out of control. I don't know if you would have been in any of those situations before, but what's the procedure for that?
If a person has an outburst, regardless of whether it's a defendant who may be or may not be in custody, or an attorney, or just a person observing, we have deputies, staffed in the courtroom, and they take control of those individuals. And if it's a defendant that's in custody, they take them back into the holding cell immediately. If it's a person just in the general public that's there observing, they may take them outside of the courtroom, or they may take them into custody at that point. It really just depends.
When it pertains to your job, it might get interesting because you have to wonder, do you have to try and take note of everything that's said during those outbursts?
Yes.
Do you ever just stop, or do you have to try and do every single part?
Oh no, you just keep going, and you try to get, there are going to be some comments here or there that you're just not going to be able to get, but you do the best you can. And again, you've got some backup things that you can go back and listen and rewind and re-listen again and try to get every little minute detail that you can. Because that could have a perception, say if it's in a jury trial and the jury hasn't come to a conclusion at that point, that outburst could be part of the appeal, that it was an undue influence on the jury's deliberations. So everything that happens in a felony case is of the utmost importance to be a part of the transcript.
Definitely. And sometimes you might develop a bias one way or the other for a case. Does that ever impact your work, like what you write down, things like that? Or?
No, what is said is what is said, and my opinion doesn't matter one way or the other. So I have an opinion a lot of times of whether I think someone's guilty or not, but sometimes I've also heard some of the pretrial motions, things the jury may or may not get to hear, but regardless of whether they're guilty or not guilty, it makes no difference to me. It's all part of the record.
It might get pretty emotional at times in the courtroom, and does that ever make your job easier or harder? Like, if you can sympathize with the person, does that make it easier to work and write everything down? Or
No, if it's something very emotional, child molestation cases are always the worst as far as having that sympathetic feeling, and it does make it harder. It doesn't change the fact that everything's going in the record, but you have to try really hard sometimes not to cry, try to focus on someone else in the courtroom that maybe doesn't make you think about what's actually happening. When you hear people talk in your mind, you're visualizing what they're talking about, and I try to divert my attention away from that if I can, but it's very difficult to do. And then on top of that, then if I do a transcript, then I have to go back, re-listen to all of that all over again, then read it before I finalize everything. So by the time a transcript goes in, I've heard the testimony at least twice, sometimes 3 times, and then I've read it all the way through. So I'm very familiar with all of it all over again.
some would say one of the hardest parts of your profession is just getting everything down, but I feel like another really challenging part is just kind of sitting through some of these cases and just trying to keep a composure and like a non-biased look and things
Right,
like that.
right.
The molestation cases are pretty severe, so is hopefully that's not too common of a case for you.
Actually, it is very common. It's a very big part of our dockets, and it's becoming more and more common. I think not necessarily that it's more common, it's that more and more people have come forward and they're reporting those crimes. Which is a good thing that they're reporting them, but it is unfortunate that that's going on.
Well, hopefully never have to get involved with something as large scale as like Jeffrey Epstein or something like that.
No, no.
Yeah,
No,
but-
hopefully those will stay in federal court and away from the county courthouses.
yes, that'll be quite shocking, I'm sure, for you to see something of that magnitude.
Yes, yes.
So you can be thankful for that at least,
Right, right.
I'm sure if you did work in a federal court, your job might be more difficult.
Yes, yes. They are very inundated with very large, high-profile cases.
Yeah, so it's like a good balance for what you do, right? Like it's not
Right.
too, boring and moderate, and it's not too over the top and crazy.
Right.
Just every case is different.
Yes, every case is different. We do, in the court that I work, which is Superior Court, we have a lot of divorce cases, and we have a lot of course, felony criminal cases. So there's a little bit of a mix of that. We're not doing the same thing day in and day out, and kind of mixes it up a little bit.
Yeah, well, I'm sure it's a very fulfilling career at times, and if somebody was considering going into this field, what would you tell them?
I would tell them that we are very short of court reporters right now. Anyone who went into court reporting could get a job. Again, it's been said for at least 20 years that we're going to be taken over by digital recording, but that hasn't happened. A lot of digital recording has caused problems with transcripts and cases having to be retried. So I think there's going to always be a career for people who want to be court reporters.
And the other profession that I think about when I think about court reporters is if it's a closed door case that is not being filmed for an audience or anything like that, like the artists that have to do the sketches.
Yes.
Does that ever tie into what you do, or do you work with those people?
We've never had an artist come into our court. I'm not sure, but I think that's more common in federal court. There's something in Georgia called Rule 22, and the news stations can request to record the proceedings, so they're able to do that, as long as the judge and the parties are willing to allow it. So I haven't ever seen the court sketch artist, but I know that they're still out there in other states and in federal court.
It seems like, depending on the case, it could be an easier or harder job than what you do.
Oh, I would definitely think so, yes. But I can't draw. I'm not an artist, so I have nothing to compare that with.
Well, everybody has their own ways of making art. Your art is through writing. So, a very interesting career for you to have. And, people should probably appreciate people like you more, because when people think of a court, they think about the judge and the criminals and the defendants, but not always the court reporter.
Right. I think sometimes we're kind of an afterthought, even with some of the attorneys that we have. But in the county where I work, we're very fortunate. The judges are all very supportive of us, very appreciative of what we do. everyone can be late except for the court reporter and the deputies. The proceedings can't go forward on a felony case without a court reporter there to make the record. So we have an important job, and for the most part, we're appreciated.
I feel like the equivalent for your career in the film industry is a stunt double, because they're very important, but not everybody always goes out of their way to look up who was the stunt double in this movie I just watched.
Right.
But a very important part of the process. So.
Right. Yes. They only care about the court reporter if one is not there.
Well, hopefully people will grow to further appreciate the people that do what you do, because it certainly is not an easy career, and it's a very, complex career, I would say. There's just so much diversity in what you work with each case, and some cases are entertaining, some of them you probably wish would be done the next day, but they're not.
Absolutely.
So what exactly was that device that you were holding?
This is a steno mask, is what they call it, and it has a microphone in it, and when you're in court, of course, you can't talk really loud where people can hear you, so it silences you as you're taking down the proceedings. The computer-aided transcription is very helpful, but like Siri, everyone's familiar with Siri,
Mm-hmm.
just because you say it doesn't mean Siri understands it properly. So sometimes you can get very good accuracy, and other times not so great accuracy. So it's a little bit of a hybrid of both. Some things I have to come home and just type straight out, depending on how the proceedings were going, if people were talking over each other a lot, or if they're talking too fast. And then other times I can just edit the takedown that I have from the proceedings. The other method of takedown is the steno machine, which all of us have seen on TV, the shorthand machines. But to do the shorthand, you have to learn basically a whole nother language, and it's difficult to find schools to take that method as courses. So the voice recording has been kind of more on the edge of what's being taught now.
Thank you for your time. Unless there's anything else you'd want to mention, I could add that in.
Well, no, thank you for asking questions. Again, it's a very rewarding career, and we need more court reporters. So maybe someone out there that's watching this will say, hey, this is something I would like to do.
Before I began planning out this project, I really was not super knowledgeable about court reporters and what their job completely entailed. There's the obvious aspects of, somebody has to take down what all is being said in the court, but there's a lot more to it than that. It's interesting to hear the perspective of an actual court reporter and to see her using her various forms of technology. All in all, it's just really been an incredible experience. For a while I was considering cutting this video down some, but I thought about it, and there was a lot that was said in this interview that was really insightful, and the conversation flowed naturally, so if I tried to cut it up any, then it would kind of sound not right. If you're ever having a court case in Gwinnett County or wherever it might be and you run into Sheila, be sure to thank her for the hard work that she does in making sure that the court cases can happen as they should. It's a very impressive job, very interesting career, and if you want to get involved in the court world, but you don't necessarily want to go to law school, a court reporter job might be just the thing for you. But thank you to everyone for taking the time to watch this interview, and I will see you next time.